last year was your first year speaking.
It was,
and it was a year in review. And I remember going into this huge room, and it was filled last year, and just being sort of blown away by your style, by the way you presented these things. It was this sort of like bam, 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 one after the next of the coolest tricks. And I'm going to use that word, the coolest tricks in FileMaker. Just crazy stuff that you're just like, it was like Matt, how sleight of hand kind of thing. Like, how did that even just happen? So when I found out you were doing that thing this year, I was very excited. It was, again, one of my most anticipated sessions, and there was a lot of buzz about it, and it was really, it definitely met my expectations.
Thanks.
Maybe exceeded them, and I'll tell you why, and then I want your reaction. What I think happened between last year and this year's session was last year was a bunch of cool stuff that made you kind of wow. This year was a bunch of cool stuff that made you wow, but seemed so relevant and so applicable to my clients' solutions. And I'm in custom development, so my clients aren't going to pay for Flash. I'm not sitting around at night just like trying to one-up my buddy. They're paying for functionality, but the things I saw you do today, I can go back right now and bring functionality, increase business productivity, streamline solutions as a result.
That's an interesting comparison between the 2 years. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, I wonder if part of that is that some of the stuff from this year was stuff that was going on last year, but I didn't trust it or didn't know that it had the implications it did, or and I thought of them as tricks as well. And now it's been a year, and other people are validating some of these ideas. I mean, these aren't my ideas, right? This is stuff that people were working on last year. They keep working on it, and now a year later, we're like, you know what? This has made my life better, and made my clients' life better. So maybe that's what was happening. We also should have lost a lot fewer things this year.
Well, but it's also maybe about just the natural process of selection. That certain things are just going to fall by the wayside because they're just not.
Indeed.
There's going to be, it's like those FileMaker things where, yeah, you can make it happen, but there's this one thing. Like if I navigate to the next record, the whole thing crashes and burns.
Right. So now you have this server, and it's been up a year, and you're like, what works, what doesn't?
Exactly.
And yeah, we talked I say maybe there's an emerging consensus around some of this stuff. Well, it turns out that there is an emerging consensus around some of this stuff. That's cool.
So what's the process that you go through to gather this stuff that you're showing, these little cool tricks?
Yeah, it's like the best of times and the worst of times, right? So like the good part of it is just like exhibiting. When you exhibit here, like hundreds of people come up to you and they're like, look what I did. When we had our calendar booth, people were like, look what I did with your calendar, right? And it was awesome. And so I would have like hundreds of screenshots of people's whacked out cool. So a lot of it is that people will call or email or like we'll do an integration for something. They'll be like, by the way, have you seen this? But in like the 2 months before DEF CON, it's like a constant like switchboard of phone calls and demo requests and like, hey, you sent me that file, but like, and just trying to get the actual demoable code with like, some of the stuff we were showing had like health data in it, and like to get that demoable on time.
Right.
The logistics are kind of
excuse me.
But the good part of it is really pretty good. You do get to see a lot of great work.
So are you out there soliciting from people you know and trust, or are people just sending you their files?
Both.
Okay.
Every year I make a list of the people who I think are doing interesting stuff, and I call them and say, what have you seen this year that blew you away?
But you depend on them to make sure that those files are demoable.
Yeah.
That you've got
absolutely.
Private data and everything.
Yeah, the private data. And so a lot of stuff that gets thrown away, because at the end of the day, it's just too fringy, or we feel like, I wanted, this year the criteria was, it's got to be in production somewhere. It's got to be in
production.
There you
go. I mean, that takes that technique from being a, hey, look what I did trick, to this brings value. Because if it's in production, presumably it's bringing some value back to the customer.
So we had a number of things that I was pretty excited about. In fact, you'll see there's a little strange thing to say, but you'll see that the DEF CON slides that are on the CD don't match what are going to be on the update site.
Okay.
Some of the stuff on the, we would call the customer and they're like, yeah, we're no longer using that, or we pulled it, or the developer oversold it, or not for any terrible reasons, but like, sometimes as a developer you build something because you're more excited about it than the client. There's no real business case for it, and eventually it gets perfect.
Right after a new release, all the time.
Indeed.
Let's talk about some specifics in the session, though. I want to digress just a little bit because I saw a couple of things that really kind of blew me away. And this was toward the end of the session. The first was, you referenced it, it was this idea of being able to view data, to view portal rows. But the data were coming from a global variable.
Yeah.
And without getting super technical about that, can you just sort of tell us about where that came from and what implications you see that having.
Sure. So, the idea is that you have some dummy records in a portal and an unstored calc there that just looks up into a global variable and says, well, what's the first thing in the global variable? That goes in the first row. What's the second thing in the global variable? That goes in the second row. The reason we first came to that idea was that we had things in our calendar a long time ago that were very server heavy. And we weren't sure how server heavy until we started doing some packet sniffing.
Right.
And we're like, man, that widget with these little mini calendars, that's hitting the server 42 times 7 times 6 times. We got to stop that.
Yeah.
So let's hit the server once, write it up to a global variable, and then take the global variable apart. And it turns out a lot of other people are thinking about this stuff, and Bruce Robertson kind of really articulated this idea. So at first it came from caching, right? We're going to go to the server once. I don't need to refresh that data so often. I'm not going to have it live.
Right.
So caching, and then people started to think about, well, what if you put something in the global variable that's not just from one source? You write half the global variable from one table, half from another table. So you can really show whatever you want up there. And that's when things kind of opened up for me, and I was like, wow, this lets a single portal show data from more than one data source, more than one table occurrence, because that's the problem with portals. Right. Our old calendars had actually 3 screens behind one another. This is the portal to one table in your data, this is the portal to to-dos, and here's the portal to invoice line items or whatever.
Right.
It had to be different portals. Now we can mix data together. So the examples we were showing have portal rows that are aggregates, summary information, and
so that's okay. I got that down, and I got to be honest with you, because I was sitting next to Molly, and I may have even said these words: "Why do I care about this?" Mm-hmm. But then, when you brought that together with the drag and drop, okay, you showed the drag and drop technique made famous by Andrew Persons at Excelsis, and
thank you, Andrew.
Yes, and that technique has kind of been out there now, and it's getting a lot of talk, but then you brought those two things together in Jason Young's demo that just it I understood. Yeah. It's like bing.
Yeah.
And then when you showed Jason's demo, that's when I understood how I can take this back immediately and give this an application right into a client database, and they're going to be able to work faster and smarter, making their business better. So tell us about Jason's demo.
Yeah.
And what that all, everything about what that entailed.
And remind me to tell you about watching him build that, because he lives in Seattle, and so I saw an early draft of it. Just the way he thinks is amazing. But he had a screen with 4 columns for jobs, for active jobs, and a column of resources on the side. You would drag from the resource into the job where you want the resource to be. So Jim's going to work on job 1, Mary's going to work on job 2. And each portal for the job didn't just have a list of resources. It had a header that said shift 1, and you could turn it down a little hierarchy and see the shift 1 records, then collapse it, and then turn down for shift 2 and drag a few people into shift 2. So what was really cool is
wait, this is FileMaker. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it looks that in the session I'm it's a 0 training screen because it just works.
I love when you said that because it was so true. It was
so watching Jason build this, the first version didn't have the turn down. It was just because he was concerned about drag and drop. He was kind of feeling it out. And once he got the drag and drop working, each portal is based on a global variable. So he started writing stuff into the global variable by hand, just typing into it. So he would there were 4 people in the global variable. He would put in a carriage return at the beginning, and ahead of them all, he would type resources for job X parentheses 4, close parentheses. And that would show up in the portal as the first row. Then he goes over and does a little conditional formatting on the portal. And he's like, for starters, the parentheses in here, just make it gray and make it look like a header record. And boom, you have this hierarchical thing in the portal.
Oh, that's the whole, because that was the one part I forgot about.
Yeah, because he's turning down these little...
He's grouping.
And the facility, the ease with which he understood that the global variable technique would let him put whatever he wanted in the portal, and all he had to do was use conditional formatting to make it look like a header as opposed to look like a resource record. I was like, wow, because those two demos came to me within a day of each other, and it went from working to being what you saw in a day.
Wow,
he's a smart.